Imagine for a second that you're looking at a state-of-the-art brain scan,
Hmm.
like incredibly high-tech.
Oh, yeah. The kind you see in top-tier research labs.
Exactly. And the patient in the scanner is just looking at a simple, bright red apple.
Okay.
And on your screen, you see this whole biological symphony play out. The neurons are firing in real time, the visual cortex is lighting up, blood flow is surging to specific regions. I mean, it's a perfect map of human perception unfolding right in front of you.
Watching that physical machinery operate is stunning, honestly, but it completely misses the core of the event.
Right.
Our most advanced scientific tools can track, every single electrical impulse and chemical cascade in that scanner, but they're entirely blind to the actual subjective reality of redness.
The feeling of it.
Exactly. We can map the mechanism perfectly, but the deeply personal feeling of experiencing that color is just, well, nowhere on the screen. It's this massive blind spot in our understanding of reality.
And that blind spot is exactly what our deep dive is focused on today. We're exploring one of the greatest, most fundamental mysteries of existence. Does the brain actually create consciousness? Or is consciousness a fundamental feature of reality itself?
It's a huge question.
It really is. And today's insights are drawn from a recent, incredibly thought-provoking presentation by Christoph Koch at the 15th Behind and Beyond the Brain Symposium.
Yes, Koch's work is fascinating here.
Right. And Koch is one of the world's most prominent neuroscientists, someone who spent decades working at the absolute pinnacle of brain research, which is, what makes his recent shift in perspective so fascinating.
It really is a profound pivot. I mean, we're talking about a rigorous scientist, a former professor at MIT and Caltech.
Not a fringe guy at all.
Not at all. He spent years embedded in the dominant scientific worldview of materialism. That framework that basically assumes everything, including the mind, can be completely reduced to matter, energy, and physical laws.
But something changed.
Yeah. The sheer weight of the data and the persistent mysteries of the brain, they've just forced him to question those boundaries.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why Koch's ideas are so revolutionary, we have to clearly define exactly where materialism hits a brick wall.
Right.
And to be fair, materialism has a stellar track record. Neuroscience has made enormous strides. We know the specific neural correlates for pain or, for recalling a childhood memory.
Yeah, or complex decision-making. We can track those biological pathways really well.
So why does a framework with so much explanatory power suddenly fail when it comes to the actual feeling of being alive?
Well, the failure happens because materialism runs headfirst into what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness.
The hard problem.
Yeah. We've mastered the easy problems, which I should say aren't actually easy. They're incredibly complex neurobiology. But they are mechanical.
Right.
We can explain how the eye processes light or how the brain integrates sensory data, but the hard problem asks a fundamentally different question.
Which is?
How do purely physical, electrical, and chemical reactions, like literally sodium and potassium ions moving across cell membranes, how do they magically give rise to subjective experience? There's just nothing in the laws of physics that dictates a chemical reaction should feel like anything at all.
So if we can see the mechanical parts moving when someone sees that red apple, but we can't find the feeling, is it sort of like looking at the blueprints of a car engine?
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like you can study the schematics all day. You can completely master the physics of internal combustion, the spark plugs, fuel injection, all of it.
Right.
But analyzing that blueprint gives you absolutely zero understanding of what a road trip actually feels like.
That analogy captures the conceptual gap perfectly. You're describing a category error, essentially. Materialism gives us this exquisite description of the engine's mechanics, the how.
Not the experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The road trip, the subjective experience of the wind in your face, or the nostalgia of the music on the radio, that belongs to a fundamentally different category of reality. Knowing every single mechanical detail of the brain still leaves us completely in the dark about the mind. And for decades, scientists just assumed that if we mapped enough neurons, the explanation for consciousness would eventually just, pop out of the data.
But it hasn't.
It hasn't happened. And logically, Koch is pointing out that it might never happen.
Which means we have to start looking at the anomalies, the places where the standard model just kind of fractures.
Exactly. And Koch points to three major areas of uncertainty. starting with the sheer weirdness of modern physics.
Oh, quantum mechanics.
Right, which already tells us that reality at the foundational level is far less solid than our everyday experience suggests. But it's really his focus on unusual human experiences that anchors this whole thing.
Yeah, he brings up phenomena that utterly defy the materialist model,
Yeah.
specifically something called terminal lucidity.
Yes. Terminal lucidity is one of the most perplexing phenomena documented by medical professionals.
What exactly does it look like?
Well, we're talking about an unexpected, really sudden return of profound mental clarity in patients shortly before death.
Just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. This often occurs in individuals suffering from late-stage dementia, Alzheimer's, or other severe neurological conditions that had left them completely unresponsive or unable to communicate for years.
Okay, wait, let me push back on this a bit. Couldn't terminal lucidity just be a final, desperate chemical dump in a dying brain?
That's a common theory, yeah.
Like a massive biological surge of adrenaline or neurotransmitters that just temporarily wakes the system up? Why does Koch, who is a rigorous scientist, look at a dying brain and use it to question the fundamental nature of consciousness?
Well, that chemical surge hypothesis is usually the first defense from a strict materialist perspective. But it falls apart when you actually look at the physical neurobiology of severe dementia.
How so?
In late-stage Alzheimer's, the brain isn't just low on chemicals, it's physically destroyed.
Oh.
The cortical networks are ravaged by amyloid plaques and tau tangles. Entire regions responsible for memory and language have atrophied and structurally degraded.
So the pathways are literally gone.
Right. A surge of adrenaline or dopamine cannot magically rebuild a destroyed neural pathway. You can't run complex software on a shattered hard drive no matter how much electricity you pump into it.
That makes sense.
Yet, these patients suddenly recognize family members, recall specific past events, and speak with complete coherence.
The structural damage is what makes it such an anomaly. If the physical hardware of the brain is physically missing or destroyed, how on earth is the software of the mind running perfectly?
Exactly the issue.
It's as if a broken radio that's only played static for 5 years suddenly tunes into a crystal clear broadcast right before the power cord is permanently pulled.
The broken radio is the perfect framework for the question Koch is forcing us to confront. If the physical machinery is ravaged, but the subjective experience suddenly comes through with pristine clarity, we have to seriously ask something big. Is the brain actually generating consciousness, or is it acting more like a receiver for a signal that exists independently of that hardware?
A receiver. Man, if the brain isn't producing consciousness the way, say, a stomach produces acid, but rather filtering or receiving it that kind of rips up the textbook, it means the mind isn't a localized byproduct of healthy cells.
It shifts the entire cosmological picture. If phenomena like terminal lucidity expose these undeniable gaps, Koch argues we have no choice but to step outside the confines of strict materialism and reconsider ancient philosophical models of reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting. A former Caltech neuroscientist is suggesting that ancient philosophers might have been closer to the truth all along.
Yes, he specifically points to idealism and panpsychism.
Let's break those down because they turn everything we learn in high school biology upside down. What is idealism?
So, idealism is the philosophical proposition that consciousness or the mind is the foundational fabric of reality. In our standard scientific view, matter is primary, and consciousness is just this quirky byproduct that emerged late in the game. Idealism flips that completely.
How so?
It suggests consciousness is the primary substance, and the physical material world is almost secondary, like a manifestation within that consciousness.
Wild.
Ugh.
And then there's panpsychism, which takes things in an even more specific direction. This is the idea that consciousness isn't an exclusive club for humans and higher mammals.
Right.
It's a fundamental property woven throughout all of nature, existing in varying degrees.
And the shift to panpsychism actually solves a major evolutionary headache.
Really? What headache?
Well, under strict materialism, you have a universe that is completely dead, dark, and mindless for billions of years.
Right, just rocks and gas.
Exactly. Then, over time, biological organisms become more complex, and suddenly, poof, a switch flips, and subjective experience magically appears out of dead matter.
The magic switch problem. It's like a light turning on in a house that doesn't even have electricity.
Precisely. Evolution is a continuum of physical complexity. It makes logical sense that the inner experience is also a continuum. Panpsychism argues that consciousness doesn't just spontaneously generate out of nowhere. It was always there.
It's an underlying, pre-existing ingredient of the cosmos.
Yes.
But hold on, let's ground this before it floats away into pure sci-fi. Does panpsychism mean that the pebble sitting in my garden right now is having a conscious thought?
No, no.
Is the rock stressed about the weather? Or is it more like consciousness is a fundamental raw ingredient like mass or gravity or electrical charge, and the human brain just happens to be a highly concentrated, complex configuration of it?
That distinction is absolutely vital. The quickest way to dismiss panpsychism is to caricature it as rocks having feelings or trees doing arithmetic. Koch and modern philosophers aren't suggesting that inanimate objects have complex, reflective thoughts.
So comparing it to mass or electrical charge is the right way to think about it?
It is. Think about mass. An electron has a virtually incomprehensible, infinitesimal degree of mass. A star has a staggering degree of mass.
Okay.
They both possess the exact same fundamental property, just scaled entirely differently. Panpsychism suggests subjective experience works similarly.
Okay, I'm tracking.
The foundational building blocks of reality possess a rudimentary, incredibly simple spark of feeling or isness. It's not human thought. But as those basic elements integrate into highly complex, interconnected biological structures like our nervous system, that raw property scales up.
Into the rich, vibrant self-awareness that you and I experience.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes deep intuitive sense. It removes the need for a magical biological switch. But here's my issue. It sounds like beautiful, untestable philosophy. You can't put a rock on a therapist's couch and ask it how it feels.
True.
So how does a rigorous, data-driven researcher like Koch bridge the gap between ancient cosmology and actual testable science?
By attempting to describe it mathematically, Koch isn't abandoning the scientific method here. He's applying it to a new paradigm. He is one of the leading proponents of a framework called Integrated Information Theory, or IIT.
Right, IIT. This is the attempt to literally calculate consciousness.
Yes.
The theory proposes that subjective experience arises in systems that combine massive amounts of information into a unified, indivisible whole. There are two very specific requirements for a system to be conscious under this math, right?
Yeah. The first requirement is straightforward how much information the system contains.
Okay.
But the second requirement is the critical mechanism, how deeply those parts are interconnected and causally influencing each other.
Let's test this with an analogy. Imagine a massive public library. It holds millions of books, which represents an enormous amount of information.
Okay, I'm with you.
But that library isn't conscious because the books are just sitting statically on the shelves. A biology textbook isn't interacting with a poetry book. The information is high, but the integration is zero.
That's a great baseline. High data, zero causal interaction.
But if we somehow networked all those books together, if they were constantly sharing, processing, updating, and altering each other's data in real time, forming a unified network where you can't separate one book's data from the whole, according to IIT, does the library wake up? Is that integration the actual spark of experience?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the exact mechanism IIT is describing. When the system stops being a mere collection of separate parts and becomes a causally unified whole, where the state of one element fundamentally depends on the state of all the others, the integration is the consciousness.
Wow.
IIT literally assigns a mathematical value to this level of integration, a number called phi.
Phi. So the higher the phi, the higher the integration and the more conscious the system is.
And because it's a mathematical framework, IIT is often called a scientific version of panpsychism. It implies that consciousness isn't restricted to carbon-based neurons at all. Any system, biological, artificial, or otherwise, that reaches a high enough phi value possesses some degree of subjective experience.
That is mind-bending. But this isn't just an abstract thought experiment taking place on university whiteboards. This brings us to where the highly abstract math crashes directly into deeply human life or death stakes.
It really does.
Koch is using the math of IIT for critical medical applications right now, specifically for unresponsive patients.
Yes. The clinical application of this theory is profoundly important. It addresses one of the most terrifying scenarios in medicine, locked-in syndrome, or severe brain injuries, where a patient appears completely comatose.
Where the external physical machinery to move a muscle, blink an eye, or speak a word is broken. They appear completely unresponsive to the outside world. If you're listening to this, imagine the sheer terror of that reality. You might be fully aware, feeling pain, hearing your family in the hospital room, but your body is a totally sealed vault.
It's a nightmare scenario.
How does Koch's work on the mathematical foundations of consciousness actually reach inside that vault?
Well, traditionally, medical tests rely on physical responses to gauge consciousness. If the body doesn't react, the assumption is often that the mind is gone.
Right.
But applying IIT changes the methodology entirely. We stop looking for a physical reaction and start looking at the architecture of the brain's data. Koch and his colleagues utilize a method colloquially known in the field as ZAP and ZIP.
Zap and zip. Break down how that actually measures fail in a human being.
So they use transcranial magnetic stimulation, that's the ZAP, to send a safe magnetic pulse directly into the patient's brain.
Okay.
Then they use a high-density EEG to record the electrical echo that ripples across the neural networks. If the brain is deeply unconscious, say in a deep coma or under heavy anesthesia, the echo is simple.
What does that look like?
It's a localized blip that quickly fades out, meaning the information isn't integrating.
But what if the patient is locked in? What if the subjective experience is still in there?
If the patient is conscious, that magnetic ping doesn't just fade. It ripples outward in a highly complex, chaotic, widespread wave. The different regions of the brain interact with the signal, sharing and integrating it.
Wow.
They then take that EEG data and literally compress it using a computer algorithm that's the zip part of the process. If the data is highly complex and uncompressible, it indicates a high degree of integrated information. It indicates hi-fi.
So the math is telling the doctors the physical body is broken, but the internal system is highly interconnected.
Yeah.
The light is still on inside the how.
Exactly. It gives clinicians a physical biomarker for invisible consciousness. The ethical implications are staggering, honestly. Reliable detection methods based on IIT change medical diagnoses, alter treatment plans, and heavily influence the incredibly difficult, heartbreaking decisions families make regarding end-of-life care.
That's incredible.
It transforms a philosophical debate about panpsychism into a tool for supreme human compassion.
So what does this all mean? Let's trace the arc of what we've covered today. We started with the sheer limits of mapping the physical brain, hitting the brick wall of the hard problem, that inexplicable gap between biological machinery and the feeling of redness.
Yeah, the feeling we can't map.
Right. And we explored the anomalies, like the structural impossibility of terminal lucidity, where a damaged brain suddenly transmits a perfectly clear mind, forcing us to ask if the brain is just a receiver.
And that receiver concept naturally led us into the paradigm shifts of idealism and panpsychism, the ancient yet newly relevant idea that consciousness isn't a biological accident, but a foundational ingredient woven into the fabric of the cosmos.
And we saw how Christoph Koch grounds that ancient philosophy in the rigorous math of integrated information theory, calculating consciousness through interconnected data.
Right.
And finally, we saw how that exact math, measuring the complex echoes of a magnetic pulse, is being used today to find the hidden consciousness inside unresponsive patients.
The scope of this is massive, but the most vital takeaway is deeply personal. Knowing that science is now exploring consciousness as a fundamental property of the universe should really change how you move through your day.
Absolutely.
The next time you experience something utterly mundane, the bitterness of your morning coffee, the warmth of the sun on your skin, or just seeing a bright color, take a moment to recognize the profound, unexplained miracle that you are experiencing anything at all. You aren't just an object in the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself.
I couldn't agree more. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building strictly on the mechanics of integrated information theory.
Oh, this should be good.
If IIT tells us that consciousness arises mathematically from highly interconnected, integrated information, regardless of the physical material, what happens as our global digital networks, the internet, and artificial intelligence become increasingly hyper-connected?
Oh, wow.
If subjective experience is a fundamental property of nature that scales with integration, at what point does the planetary network of processing nodes begin to experience its own spark of awareness? Something to think about the next time you log on, or the next time you look at a bright red apple and wonder who or what is actually looking back.